Welcome back to the No Code Conversations podcast, where founders and operators share the real story behind building their business from first idea to launch and beyond. Today, I'm joined by Suchen Janjali. Sushen has spent over 20 years in banking and financial services, founded his own financial technology consultancy, which ran for 11 years before being acquired, and now leads the EMEA Financial Services division at Orion Innovation. He knows what it takes to drive digital transformation inside large and complex institutions. Sushen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Reese. Looking forward to the chat.
Fantastic. So let's start with your background. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the financial world to begin with.
Well, you see, I was an engineer and then an MBA finance and had an inclination towards, finance. Finance was in the university days, it was not that much glued towards banking or something like that. But, the technology was exploding. So when I went to the uni, and now the people who are in uni, it's the same inflection point. We had the internet coming up, and the famous statement from Bill Gates: if you're not on internet, you are doomed. So we just started learning tech, and that was one of my first exposure to tech. I started my career actually with a software company called Temenos, and they were a core banking software company, basically implementing their banking software globally. Then I moved on to banking, basically implementing the technology. So worked with bigger names like Credit Suisse and then Delta Lloyd at that time, then moved on to again Credit Suisse. Primarily in all these roles, Deutsche and all, I was responsible basically to implement the technology.
Fantastic.
Technology, a package software, before I started, to do my own stuff.
Fantastic.
Bulk of a career I spent in that sort of thing.
Fantastic. And obviously spending a large amount of time within finance, within banking, before going out your own, what made you think that there's a gap here in the market, or there's something worth building a business around? Did you notice problems that were never getting solved, or what made you take a step out of that and build your own business?
I think it was more of a comfort factor, because when I saw the banking technology was great, I was working in Canary Wharf, great lifestyle. Credit Suisse had everything in house, and 2007 the markets were up just like it is now. Everything was going up, and then suddenly it crashed. 2009, I saw that Lehman Brothers collapse and people walking away with the boxes. That actually, opened up my eyes, saying nothing is, given in the world, which is going to stay as is. So that made me think, that I need to basically shake up and, get some more experience before I should do something of my own. And of your own is, you have a destiny in your own hands, rather than you're at the mercy of a large corporate and, you don't know what is coming in. And there are so many factors. So 2016 onwards, I started basically, taking a bit more risks. Should have taken it a little earlier, in hindsight. But anyway, 2016, 17, I decided to go on my own, basically.
Fantastic. And how did that feel? Obviously, stepping away from, I suppose, what you were doing previously for so long. How did that feel venturing out on your own? Was it a scary process, or did you enjoy it? Talk to me through the mindset that you're in at that point.
So it has those, I had studied that in MBA, and, basically it has those typical phases. The first phase is alone, because you have set it up and, trying to convince the world that what you have is you should buy, and then nobody listens, basically, and you get loads of rejections, and that was the main thing. Would you still believe in your conviction and you continue? Of course, there are good suggestions that come in, that you take it and you basically change the idea a little bit, pivot a little bit. Those are the things you do. Then comes your founding team, and then the rest is when it starts taking shape, when you see the first dollar in your bank, that's where the conviction becomes reality, and then there is no looking back. The initial phases are quite lonely, but after that it's quite chaotic and busy until stability hits. So the chaotic phase for me was after like 18 months, when things, customers are ringing, you're not able to fulfill their requirements, you're not able to, you want everything, and you then wish, oh shit, I should have done XYZ when I was alone and lonely and all. Why didn't I predict this? Why didn't I do it? But you can't do it. Basically, you just have to keep solving, and you have to be very reactive, fast, to an extent also take a little bit of time off and also predict, because now the engine is rolling, which direction the things are going. So you should basically know the pathway and stuff like that. So the big moment for us came us in the COVID, when some of the people had the failures. We had the biggest spike in our business because it's work from home, it's tech, people still want to continue. Banks were operating, they shifted the whole infrastructure to work from home. There was no stoppage of technology. So that's the time we basically had this opportunity, and we got the biggest growth in those COVID years, 2020,
Amazing.
2021.
Amazing. And you mentioned there was a chaotic phase for about 18 months, and then you transitioned into a more stable or stabilized phase. Was there any reason for that transition into a stabilized phase? Like, did you bring in new headcount? Did you bring in new sort of leadership? How did you get from the chaotic phase to the stable phase?
Indeed, there was the team. I got in, somebody who can I trust, and I sorted out the operations part of the business. So that stabilized everything while I could concentrate on the sales. So once you have that particular done, and you have your processes, basically redesigned, and keep on refining it, by a established operation player, that actually gives stability to the business. So that chaotic phase was over when you make that investments. People somehow make investments in sale. I mean, it's debatable. I made this investment in sales later on because I wanted the processes to be robust, the headcount to be stable and growing, and then only an operational person, who has the understanding of giving stability to that business. That he knows how when the growth comes, he's prepared. When there is a problem, he's also prepared to take the risks. So that's where I feel that I made that right investment very early on.
Great, amazing. And obviously, setting up a consultancy or any type of business in such a high trust industry, obviously banking, finance, there's a huge amount of trust around it, especially with third party vendors. What were some of the challenges there with the sales process, and how did it look for you to get your first client?
Well, typically, it is a B2B is a relationship driven business, so the trust factor was never an issue, because once you have an impeccable track record of delivery, reliability, with your third parties and the ecosystem, you will get sponsors basically who take risks on you, because I had a huge experience of banking, huge network that I had basically built and delivered. So in a way, customers or prospects, like you could say, had basically a confidence. So the idea is you always start with the ecosystem, try and sell to the near and dear ones, okay, and that's where the trust and reliability gets basically forged into reality. Then obviously the sales, you make this investments in the sales, and then you have references, and then the rest is history. Then it's a typical sales process, and we made an investment in sales, and we had people who would basically sell. I was just looking at the operational and financial health of the company.
Fantastic. It's really interesting because it's one of those industries that personally I've not worked in directly, but we have some clients that have come from a finance background and have yeah, I suppose sold into that space. And I find it fascinating how you can build something and then sell into these big behemoth companies, these big institutions, and I suppose it really is all based around relationships and trust building, as you say. And obviously, you had a huge amount of experience before. It wasn't like you were coming in completely fresh. You had built up those relationships and that industry knowledge before, which I think has obviously made a big difference for you. So, what's one early decision when you first started the business? What's one decision that if you looked back on, you'd change it, or is there any structure that you put in place that you would change now if you had to build BankTech over again?
I wouldn't change anything if I have to build it all over again. See, basically, one thing was very, very clear: it's a people's business. Okay, and in a people's business, there are three things that are very, very important. It is the conduct of the leader. Okay, and in conduct, it comes commitment, reliability, trust. All of that is very, very important. Second thing is basically respect. Okay, people need a lot of respect. People need to be basically motivated, and not necessarily motivation doesn't mean that everything is linked to compensation, but motivation, different people have different motivation. So ours was a very early on a global business, so that attracted a lot of talent globally. Okay, so that was the main thing. And third thing is basically what helped us in the COVID is that myth, which I always believed in, since the beginning, that you don't really need to go to the office to deliver something. Okay, and most of our business was from that. That gave a lot of people a lot of flexibility. The key lied here, or the knack of making it successful lied here, is that how do you identify those people that are really committed, and as the team grows, beyond 100, 200, how do you basically, so you have to create a culture where there is basically a buy-in to this kind of a model, and people are very honest in delivering stuff, and they feel happy about it. Flexibility in working. We also managed to convince our client that the days of 8-hour time and material, all of that is finished. Okay, we changed the model to outcome based. Okay, and that involved the budget, which was the primary factor, and the timings. Always had a challenge, because you go to a suit shop and you make a tailor-made suit. Okay, the budget is, you agree and you're happy, but what happens next day is you want the suit next day, because you're so excited that you have signed this engagement, and you really want to see the suit next day, and then you start questioning, why are you taking 1 month, this, that. You will harass the tailor. But for a tailor to do a good job, he needs a certain amount of time, and there could be delays, and this is what is the real business. Is holding your clients and making them understand that that your suit will be delivered on time, and it is going to be the best delivery that you will ever see. And that was repeated, and then we built accelerators, which enhanced that process, made it faster. So that is where so I wouldn't change anything, especially if you're doing similar type of businesses where people are involved and it is largely people based.
Great. Yeah. So I suppose it really comes down to setting expectations with the client to begin with, so that they don't get disappointed. I think that's one of the challenges we've had when I first got started with app development, software development, is not setting the right expectations. And you get that exact same thing that you mentioned there, where clients are constantly emailing saying when it's going to be ready, because you didn't, or I didn't, set the right expectations to start with. Now we've kind of honed that process, and we make sure that it's very clear, like, these are the steps, these are the delivery milestones, and it kind of removes all of that I suppose disappointment potential from the client as well, which is really good. So
Correct.
Yeah, good insights there. And 11 years, long time. What was the hardest phase for you building the business over those 11 years? Was there anything that nearly...
11 years, it was more of till the exit, it was 6-7 years. Before that, I had formed this company and I was doing independent consulting.
Okay.
Actually, it was 6 years. The hardest was when we were spiking up in the COVID, and that's where we were hiring, we were delivering, and signing up contracts, unknown territories, trusting clients who we have never dealt with. Okay, that was the hardest things. And how do you basically make these kinds of decisions? You have to invest a lot of time in building these relationships. Okay, we delivered in Africa, we delivered in Middle East, we delivered in Asia Pacific. Okay, these clients, these territories we have not traveled. I had an experience of working in Africa and Middle East and all. You travel and all, but how do you basically Now, it's a very simple rule. These are banks. I mean, we had a very little bit of a structure that, okay, a safety structure. These are banks controlled by the central bank. So a bank doesn't have anything that, they're not independent individuals, fly by night operators who are going to take the software and run away. Yes, expectations are different in different continents, countries, geographies, and interpretation is also quite different. So that is what we earned, and then whole of that focus went into educating the teams. So when you promise something, you got to make sure that you understand how the customer interprets that. Okay, because you may say yes, and for him a yes may mean 10x, or he may mean minus 10x. So there are lots of banks who just like discount and they don't believe you will deliver. Whereas there are banks in the other side who basically expect that, okay, whatever you have said, you're going to meet that criteria. And then the other end of the spectrum, they take yes as like, it's done. Okay. So you got to understand most of that, time went into calming those customers and, making sure. And then basically they were all onboarded, and, now that business has an ARR from all these customers.
Amazing. Yeah, I suppose lots of differences in expectations. Yeah, really, really interesting. I think that's one of those things when you're dealing with different geographies. It's always a challenge to understand, because obviously people may have had different experiences personally before as well. They may have been burnt by previous vendors or third parties, and they have different expectations. So yeah, very, very interesting. So talk to me a little bit more about the exit, the acquisition. When did you start thinking about selling the business, and how did that process come about?
I actually never thought about selling the business. We were continuing decently. I used to get a lot of emails from private equity guys, getting to know the business, understanding. So I did 3-4 calls, and then I thought this is like a time waste for me, because they used to learn my business, understand, or raise hopes, and and these figures, valuations, and all, like, they were just like for too much for to basically take into the typical entrepreneur. So I wanted to focus. So I have a friend who has a corporate advisory firm. I said to him that, look, the business is something worth, and I'm getting basically these disturbances, distractions from these people. So why don't you basically talk and engage with them? Okay, and when it comes, if you think something is meaningful, then we'll have a chat. Okay, but I don't want to basically, I'm not looking at exiting and all, but I think something meaningful, if it comes out, to scale the business, you never know. Though it happened in 2022, late 2022, somebody came up with something that, as they say, offer you can't refuse. That's when I decided it, okay, it's fine, it makes sense, okay, for the business to scale. And the environment was changing as well, post-COVID, inflation, everything else. Kind of a finance guy, I understood that things are going to be drastic, there will be some change in politics as well. AI was basically at that time, were not like dominant as it is today, but there were signs that, there could be a lot of disruption. Didn't knew at that time where that disruption would affect, but yeah. So businesses like consultancy businesses still not disrupted, but yeah, they will be disrupted in the future. So that's where I made a decision, and and it was a good acquirer. That's what I all looked at it like, when we get acquired, will the acquirer do justice, and will they basically invest and all, and that all fell nicely.
Fantastic, amazing. Final question, Sushen. I really appreciate the time. So where can people find you? Do you have a LinkedIn, a website? What's the best way for people to connect with you and kind of support you? Or
yes, I have a LinkedIn. It is Suchen.Janjale on the profile, because I was a very early LinkedIn adopter, so I got that handle, which you can Google and find me. I'm now starting to get a little bit more active on LinkedIn. I have basically decided to move on from Orion Innovations because 3 years have been finished and I don't know what I'm going to do next. But it's mainly spending time on the family investment company and having conversations with great guys like you. But I'm involved in a lot of startup world. So I have invested in a few startups because I did my MBA from London Business School. There is an angel investment forum there, so I'm a member of that. And very interesting startups comes and presents there, and so we all like to get back to the classroom. So that's what keeps me busy. But yeah, very soon because there is so much chaos going on in the AI world. So I'm just trying to understand, where are the opportunities and where are the opportunities which are long term, because you don't want to go in a short term kind of a scenario. So that's what I'm currently studying.
Amazing. Fantastic. Sushen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Reese.
Take care.
Take care.